Seats like this aren't for you. Get out of here before I call security. Vanessa Harcourt pushed one expensive heel into the aisle and stretched her legs wide, blocking Darius Bennett as if she were daring him to challenge her. Her calf pressed against his shin, slow and deliberate, making it clear that if he tried to get past her, she intended to turn even the smallest contact into another accusation. Phones rose almost immediately. A flight attendant froze in place. "Don't just stand there," Vanessa snapped, raising her voice as more people looked over. "First class isn't a charity. People like you are always trying to slip into places where you don't belong." Darius said nothing. He remained still while the cabin supervisor checked boarding passes, and Vanessa loudly described herself as the victim to anyone willing to listen. She had no idea that the man she was humiliating controlled a $500 million contract that her husband's company could not afford to lose. Before we continue, tell me where you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Darius Bennett stood quietly in the first-class aisle, a leather briefcase resting at his side. Sunlight poured through the aircraft windows and fell across seat 2A, the seat printed clearly on his boarding pass. Unfortunately, someone else was sitting in it. "Excuse me," Darius said in a calm voice. "I believe you're in my seat." Vanessa Harcourt slowly lifted her eyes from her phone. Her perfectly manicured fingers tightened around the device as she looked him up and down with open dismissal. Darius wore a flawless charcoal suit, a crisp shirt, and a silk tie. Nothing about his appearance suggested confusion or carelessness. Vanessa still curled her lip as though his presence alone offended her. "Seats like this aren't for people like you," she said loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Go find the back of the plane where you belong." The cabin seemed to stop breathing. A passenger across the aisle lowered his newspaper. Someone farther back whispered in disbelief. One by one, phones began appearing as people realized the exchange might become something worth recording. Darius kept his composure, though his jaw tightened almost too subtly to notice. He reached into his jacket and removed his boarding pass. "My seat assignment is 2A. I'd be happy to show you the ticket." Vanessa gave a sharp, humorless laugh. "That's cute. A fake boarding pass. People pull tricks like this all the time." She shifted deeper into the leather seat, making herself more comfortable. "I fly first class constantly. I know who belongs up here and who doesn't." A young flight attendant named Paige Monroe hovered nearby, twisting her hands together. She looked from Darius to Vanessa, then down at the passenger list on her device. "Sir," she began carefully, "let me verify the assignment." "There's nothing to verify," Vanessa interrupted. "I'm not letting somebody run a scam right in front of me. He needs to move before he causes any more trouble." More passengers began recording. A businessman in the seat across from Darius stared at his laptop as if the screen had suddenly become fascinating. A woman nearby pressed her call button, then quickly canceled it. Darius remained where he was. His boarding pass stayed extended in one hand, a quiet answer to Vanessa's accusations. He had experienced versions of this moment before. The assumptions, the suspicion, the casual cruelty disguised as caution, the strange disbelief some people showed when his appearance failed to match the position, ownership, or authority they had already imagined in their minds. Success had taught him something important. Patience could be stronger than anger, and timing could matter more than volume. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "I'd appreciate it if you would leave my assigned seat." Vanessa's face flushed. "Are you threatening me?" She pulled her designer handbag closer to her body. "Did everyone hear that? He's trying to intimidate me." Paige finally forced herself to speak. "Ma'am, if I could just see both boarding passes, we can settle this quickly." "Call your supervisor," Vanessa snapped. "Right now. I'm not going to sit here and be harassed." She grabbed her phone and started tapping rapidly. "My husband's firm practically keeps this airline in business. He'll be very interested in how you're treating me." Paige looked toward the forward galley with obvious desperation. "I'll get my lead." She hurried away. Vanessa smiled with satisfaction and settled deeper into Darius's seat. "You should learn your place," she told him, lowering her voice just enough to sound falsely sympathetic. It would save everyone a lot of trouble. The discomfort around them had become impossible to ignore. One woman quickly put on noise-canceling headphones. A passenger beyond the curtain dividing the cabins shook his head, though it was difficult to know whether he was disgusted by Vanessa or uncomfortable with Darius standing there. Darius did not move. His briefcase remained beside him. His boarding pass remained visible. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't launch into a defense of his accomplishments. He simply stayed in the space that was rightfully his and refused to let shame push him away from it. A lead cabin supervisor named Lorraine Mercer appeared from the forward galley. She was a tall woman with graying hair pulled neatly back, and she took in the entire scene in a single glance. Vanessa sat comfortably in seat 2A. Darius stood in the aisle. Passengers watched from every direction. "What seems to be the problem?" Lorraine asked, though her eyes briefly moved toward Vanessa's expensive watch and large wedding ring. "This man is trying to steal my seat," Vanessa announced, before anyone else could answer. "He's making me feel unsafe. I think he should be removed." Lorraine turned toward Darius. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass?" Darius handed it to her. Lorraine examined it carefully, then checked the passenger list. "Ma'am," she said to Vanessa, "this gentleman is assigned to seat 2A. Vanessa folded her arms. "Well, I'm not moving." A small smirk appeared at the corner of her mouth. "Call security if you need to. My husband will straighten this out." She raised her phone. "In fact, I'll call him myself." Lorraine gave Darius an apologetic look, but uncertainty entered her voice. "Sir, perhaps we could find another seat for you while we sort this out." Darius looked at her steadily. "I'll wait while you call security." His calm response unsettled Vanessa more than anger would have. She pressed the phone to her ear, though no one had answered. "That's right," she announced loudly into the silent line. "Some man is creating a problem on my flight. You'll want to deal with this quickly." Lorraine lifted her radio and requested assistance. Vanessa relaxed into seat 2A with the smug certainty of someone who believed every system around her would eventually bend in her favor. The first-class cabin had become painfully tense. Passengers shifted in their seats, caught between watching and pretending nothing unusual was happening. Lorraine stood with her hands clasped tightly, while Paige and another attendant waited nearby. "I've checked the manifest again," Lorraine said. "Mr. Bennett is the passenger assigned to seat 2A. Vanessa stared at her. "Are you calling me a liar?" Her voice rose sharply enough to startle a baby in the cabin behind them. "This is unbelievable. I've never been treated this badly in my life." She pointed a manicured finger toward Darius. "This man has been intimidating me since he arrived. He's bullying me, and now you're helping him." Lorraine stepped back. "Ma'am, please lower your voice." "I will not lower my voice." Vanessa pressed one hand dramatically to her chest. "Do you have any idea who my husband is?" She paused as if preparing to reveal royalty. "Grant Harcourt, Chief Executive of Harcourt Consulting Group." Recognition flickered across Lorraine's face. Vanessa saw it and leaned into the moment. "Exactly. His company handles major contracts for this airline. We bring in millions of dollars in business. We help keep planes like this in the air." A ripple moved through the cabin. A businessman, a few rows back, stopped pretending not to watch. Paige and the other attendant exchanged an anxious glance. "And now," Vanessa continued, "you're trying to force me out because this man claims the seat belongs to him. I've never felt so unsafe on an aircraft." Lorraine's professional confidence weakened. "Perhaps we could temporarily move you to another first-class seat while we work through the issue." "Absolutely not." Vanessa stretched her legs directly into the aisle and crossed them at the ankles. The soles of her designer shoes became a physical barrier in front of Darius. "I'm not going anywhere. Honestly, I feel threatened just having him stand there staring at me." She looked directly at Darius and smiled. The trap was obvious. If he tried to reach his seat, he would have to step over her legs or brush against her. Either movement could be turned into another accusation. More phones rose. Vanessa spoke even louder. Everyone saw how aggressive he was. "I'm traveling alone, and he's trying to intimidate me out of my seat. I don't feel safe." Lorraine spoke quietly into her radio. "Security to first class. Priority assistance requested." Two uniformed airport security officers soon entered the cabin and walked up the crowded aisle. Vanessa immediately straightened and wiped at tears that weren't there. "Thank goodness you're here," she said breathlessly. "This man has been harassing me and trying to steal my seat. I've been terrified." The officers turned toward Darius. "Sir, may we see your identification and boarding pass?" Darius reached for his wallet. Vanessa began explaining her version of the story to nearby passengers in a dramatic whisper. "He walked up and demanded my seat, claimed he had a first-class ticket. Can you imagine? Thank goodness my husband has influence. He'll make sure the airline handles this properly. The officers studied Darius's documents while Vanessa continued. He's been extremely aggressive, practically threatening me. I'm still shaking. She held up a perfectly steady hand. Sir, one officer said, we're going to need you to step farther into the aisle while we work this out. Darius nodded. To obey, he had to maneuver around Vanessa's deliberately extended legs. Every passenger watched as he turned his body sideways and moved carefully so he would not touch her. Vanessa's smile widened. She reclined the seat. Much better, she said loudly. I already feel safer with him away from me. Several passengers shifted uneasily. Paige looked close to tears, but no one in the cabin challenged Vanessa directly. The security officers continued questioning Darius where everyone could see him. Vanessa made a performance of using her phone, clearly trying to reach her husband again. The bright light through the windows now felt exposing rather than warm. Darius answered every question in a level voice. His posture remained controlled, despite the humiliation of being publicly treated like a threat, while Vanessa continued occupying his legitimate seat. The aircraft door remained open while the delay grew longer. Passengers became restless. Flight attendants whispered urgently near the galley. The two security officers stood near Darius as his briefcase rested on the floor beside him. Vanessa seemed incapable of tolerating silence. This is exactly what I'm talking about, she announced to the whole cabin. The arrogance of it. Look at him standing there, trying to intimidate a woman who's traveling alone. An attendant tried to squeeze past. Excuse me, ma'am. Vanessa ignored her and continued. Do you know what the real problem is? Some people don't understand their place anymore. My husband's company keeps men like him employed. We sign their paychecks. The officers exchanged uncomfortable looks. Ma'am, one of them began. I'm not finished. Vanessa looked directly at Darius. Look at him standing there all quiet and superior. What's wrong? Nothing to say now. She leaned forward in his seat and smiled coldly. Cat got your tongue. The senior security officer tried to calm the situation. Maybe everyone could take a moment and lower the temperature here. Vanessa laughed. Lower the temperature? No. I think it's time he was removed from the flight completely. She waved her phone in the air. One call to my husband, and this airline will make sure he never gets another ticket. Her thumb hovered over the screen. It's almost sad, really. Did you honestly think you could walk onto an airplane and simply take whatever seat you wanted? That's not how the world works. The cabin had become so quiet that even the baby behind them had stopped crying. Vanessa's voice filled every corner. You know what's funny? You haven't said a single thing to defend yourself. Smart choice, because there's nothing you could say that would change. What did you say your husband's company was called? Darius's voice was quiet, but it carried with remarkable clarity. Vanessa blinked. Then the smugness returned. Harcourt Consulting Group. Maybe you've heard of it, although I doubt you spend much time in those circles. She savored each word. We handle major corporate agreements in aviation, technology, and finance. The kinds of contracts that keep entire industries moving. Thank you for confirming that, Darius said. He removed his phone from his jacket. I wanted to make certain I had the correct company before saying anything. Shortly before boarding, I approved an executive decision terminating Harcourt Consulting Group's annual contract with Bennett Innovations. Vanessa's expression changed slightly. Darius continued. The contract is worth $500 million. Absolute silence followed. A passenger dropped a magazine. Darius didn't raise his voice. I should probably introduce myself properly. Darius Bennett, Chief Executive and Majority Shareholder of Bennett Innovations. He allowed the name to settle through the cabin. The same Bennett Innovations that represents roughly 40% of your husband's annual corporate portfolio. Someone behind the first-class curtain whispered in recognition. The termination notice has already been sent to his office, Darius added. I imagine he's seeing it now. Color drained from Vanessa's face. Her phone remained lifted, but her hand had started trembling. I normally don't discuss business in public spaces, Darius said. But since you've spent so much time explaining corporate relationships to everyone here, I thought you might appreciate the update. Whispers spread through the cabin. The phone's recording Darius now turned toward Vanessa. The security officers stepped slightly away, sensing that the situation had shifted in a way none of them expected. Vanessa opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Her phone vibrated repeatedly. Grant's name appears on the screen along with several missed calls and urgent messages. Vanessa finally looked at them. "I need a moment," she said, her voice suddenly uncertain. "This is all some kind of misunderstanding." Lorraine turned toward Darius. "Sir, please take your assigned seat." Her emphasis on assigned made the correction unmistakable. "Of course." Darius stepped into seat 2A and sat down, as though the previous confrontation had not shaken him. He placed his briefcase beside him, removed his laptop, and opened it. Vanessa moved quickly toward the galley with the phone against her ear. "Grant," she whispered. "Grant, there's a man on the flight saying—" Her husband's voice came through loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "What did you do? What did you say to Darius Bennett?" "I was trying to take my seat and I—" "Your seat." Grant's volume made her pull the phone away. "Do you have any idea what's happening here? The board is in emergency session. The company is already under pressure. Bennett Innovations just terminated $500 million in annual business." Vanessa lowered her voice. "But you can fix it. Call someone. Use your connections. Fix it." Grant gave a bitter laugh. "Bennett Innovations represents 40% of our corporate portfolio. Do you understand what happens if other clients follow them? We're talking layoffs, financial instability, maybe worse." Muffled voices and movement sounded behind him. "Tell me exactly what happened. Every word." Vanessa turned away from the cabin. "I was aggressive, Grant. Threatening. I was only protecting myself." "Threatening." Grant sounded stunned. "There are videos online showing you sitting in his assigned seat and making discriminatory comments. People are already sharing them everywhere." Papers rustled on his end. "Do you have any idea who Darius Bennett is?" Before Vanessa could answer, Lorraine approached carrying a tablet. "Mrs. Harcourt, I've received confirmation from our corporate liaison team." She showed Vanessa the profile attached to Darius's reservation. His executive status and important customer designations were clearly visible. "Seat 2A belongs to Mr. Bennett. You need to collect your belongings and move to your own assigned seat immediately." Vanessa pressed her phone closer. "Grant, call the airline. Use whatever influence we have." "Influence?" Grant's voice cracked with frustration. "Our influence is disappearing because of what you did. Just get through the flight without making this worse." The call ended. Vanessa stared at the dark screen. Her carefully maintained confidence cracked. She collected her designer handbag and carry-on items with shaking hands. The walk to her actual seat felt much longer than the short distance it covered. Phones quietly recorded her retreat. She avoided looking at Darius, but his calm presence made every earlier assumption she had made look even more reckless. Her assigned seat, 3C, felt like punishment only because she had convinced herself she deserved something better. Passengers who met her eyes quickly looked away. Lorraine apologized to the cabin for the delay and announced that departure preparations would continue. The aircraft door closed. Vanessa sat rigidly, breathing shallowly while thoughts raced through her mind. Her humiliation quickly changed into anger. She imagined the messages already moving through her social network. She imagined friends, board members, charity contacts, and business acquaintances watching the videos. Her eyes fixed on Darius a short distance away. He was working quietly on his laptop. The calmness bothered her more than any argument could have. To Vanessa, this could not be finished. She had built much of her life around social influence, around the belief that a name, a connection, or a carefully placed accusation could move people out of her way. That influence had suddenly failed, but Grant still had money, lawyers, public relations advisors, and corporate relationships. As the attendants completed their safety procedures, Vanessa barely watched. Her anger hardened into purpose. In her mind, Darius had not simply reclaimed a seat. He had challenged the social order she believed protected her. She decided he would regret it. The aircraft later descended through the coastal fog toward San Francisco. For several hours, tension remained inside the cabin. Darius worked steadily, answered messages, and reviewed contracts while Vanessa repeatedly watched him and typed on her phone. After landing, passengers began gathering their belongings. A flight attendant approached Darius. "Mr. Bennett, I've been asked to have you remain seated after we reach the gate." Darius nodded. He had already suspected something was being arranged. Vanessa had spent much of the flight sending messages and holding whispered conversations with members of the crew. When the aircraft reached the gate, 2 uniformed airport security officers boarded through the front door and walked directly toward Darius. "Sir, We need you to come with us regarding an incident reported during the flight. The older officer rested one hand near his belt. Darius closed his laptop carefully. Of course. I would like the record to reflect that the entire confrontation was recorded by multiple passengers. That's part of what we need to review, sir. The younger officer motioned toward the aisle. Please come with us. Vanessa watched with poorly hidden satisfaction as Darius stood and walked toward the exit with the officers. Passengers began recording again. Paige, the attendant who had originally tried to help him, could not meet his eyes as he passed. Check his bags carefully, Vanessa called after them. He seemed extremely agitated during the flight, very unstable. Darius kept walking. His back remained straight and his pace unhurried, but he felt the weight of the stairs and cameras following him. He recognized the pattern. A system that had briefly corrected itself was being pressured to reassert the old power structure. He had seen versions of that pattern throughout his life, and familiarity did not make it hurt less. The officers led him through the jet bridge into the terminal. Travelers stopped to watch the sight of a well-dressed executive being escorted by security. Some recognized him. His name moved through the crowd in whispers. Phones rose. This way, sir. The officers directed him into a service corridor away from the polished public areas. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Behind them, Vanessa emerged from the airplane looking composed again. She had fixed her makeup and straightened her clothing. It was terrifying, she told nearby crew members loudly enough for Darius to hear. I only hope this airline learned something about screening passengers properly. Someone could have been hurt. Darius was taken into a small administrative office containing a metal table, a few chairs, a security camera, and a large mirror that was obviously two-way glass. Please sit down, Mr. Bennett. The older officer gestured toward a chair. We received a formal complaint accusing you of threatening and harassing another passenger. We need your statement. I assume you've also received the unedited recordings showing Mrs. Harcourt refusing to leave my assigned seat and making discriminatory remarks. The younger officer shifted. We're collecting all available evidence. Right now, we have to follow procedure. Of course, Darius said, his voice professional but tired. I only wonder whether the same procedure is being applied to the passenger who refused to leave a seat that wasn't hers. Neither officer answered. They began with standard questions. Darius gave his name, travel purpose, and other requested information with precise answers. Through the small window, airport employees moved past and glanced toward him with obvious curiosity. He could imagine Vanessa outside, telling her version of events to anyone willing to listen. His phone began vibrating. Then it vibrated again. Notifications kept arriving until both officers noticed. You can check it if you need to, the older officer said. Darius looked at the screen. His name was trending across social media. News organizations were publishing the story. Some clips showed important context. Others were clearly shortened or rearranged. One headline described a technology chief executive being removed from an airplane after a first-class dispute. Another reported that a passenger had accused him of harassment. The story was already being shaped into something different from what had happened. Darius placed the phone face down on the table. The officers resumed their questions, but uncertainty had entered their expressions. They were slowly realizing that the matter extended far beyond a routine complaint between two passengers. Outside the room, footsteps moved quickly through the corridor. Voices murmured. Phones rang. Modern outrage had begun doing what it did best, compressing complicated events into short stories that could spread faster than anyone could verify them. Darius remained upright in the uncomfortable chair and answered calmly. The fight over the facts had begun. More headlines appeared. First-class confrontation. Executive threatens passenger. Woman reports hostile behavior in premium cabin dispute. Airline investigates high-profile incident. The younger security officer cleared his throat. Mr. Bennett, airline management has authorized your release without charges. But my flight privileges are being suspended while they investigate, Darius said. The officer hesitated. Yes. Darius looked back at his phone. A new email came from Harcourt Consulting Group's communications office. The public statement accused an executive of using corporate power to threaten another passenger and intimidate a business partner. It said such behavior had no place in modern business. Darius read the words in silence. Old memories rose without invitation. A luxury dealership where employees once assumed he had wandered in by mistake. A private banking event where he had been asked for additional identification, even though he was the keynote speaker. A major corporate acquisition meeting where a board member had looked past him and asked when the actual chief executive would arrive. The older security officer interrupted his thoughts. "You're free to leave, sir. The airline would prefer that you use the service exit for the comfort of the other passengers." Darius stood and straightened his jacket. "Of course. We wouldn't want anyone to feel uncomfortable." His phone rang. It was his lead attorney, Julian Price. "Darius, I'm seeing the coverage. Grant Harcourt's people are moving fast. They have several public relations firms pushing their version of the story." "I know," Darius said quietly. "They're following the usual pattern." He paused while the officers were still within hearing distance. "Do you remember the contingency file we prepared? The one documenting discriminatory contracting practices at Harcourt Consulting?" Julian understood immediately. "Yes. Hold it for now. Let them show us how far they're willing to go." Darius followed the officers into the service corridor. "Prepare the team, but don't respond publicly yet. This isn't something we rush. They'll try to bury you in negative coverage," Julian warned. "They'll call you unstable or dangerous. Let them try." Darius remembered Vanessa's smile when security first approached him. "They think they understand how this works. They don't." A black car from his office waited outside the service area. Before he could reach it, a reporter appeared with a microphone. "Mr. Bennett, did you threaten violence over a seat assignment? Do you regularly use company contracts to pressure people?" Darius kept walking. Other memories flashed through him. Being followed by store security, a neighbor calling police while he checked his own mailbox, an investor asking to speak to the real chief executive during one of his first funding meetings. Another notification arrived. The airline publicly confirmed that Darius's travel privileges would remain suspended pending review. The reporter continued following him. "Mrs. Harcourt says you made her feel unsafe. How do you respond to accusations of aggressive behavior?" Darius reached the car. For a moment, he turned toward the camera. The reporter moved the microphone closer, hoping for an emotional reaction. Darius simply nodded politely and got into the vehicle. As the car left the airport, his executive team sent a message. "Emergency board meeting scheduled. Harcourt Consulting launching a full media campaign. Legal threats are expected." Another headline claimed an aviation industry giant had cut ties with a technology company because of a chief executive's behavior on a flight. Darius watched the airport disappear through tinted glass. He had built Bennett Innovations by understanding systems, how they operated, where they failed, who benefited from their weaknesses, and how they could be redesigned. The Harcourts thought they were fighting over one seat, one airplane, and one news cycle. They were wrong. His legal team called again. Crisis response teams were assembling. Corporate warfare was beginning to move around him. But Darius had no intention of fighting on the Harcourt's terms. He had learned long ago that many powerful systems were not fair. That did not mean they were unbeatable. It meant you had to understand the real rules, the quiet agreements made in boardrooms, private clubs, and executive offices where influence was traded far from public view. The car merged onto the highway as more notifications filled his screen. Vanessa appeared on news sites looking shaken and fragile. Grant released a carefully worded statement expressing corporate concern and suggesting Darius had abused his economic power. Darius turned off the notifications. He had watched this performance before in other forms. This time, however, he had records, years of them. The driver met his eyes in the mirror. "Where would you like to go, sir?" "The office," Darius replied. The Harcourts believed they were setting him on fire. They didn't realize the light was beginning to reveal their own weaknesses. San Francisco's towers rose through the fog. Glass and steel filled the skyline, monuments to institutions that often behaved as though their rules could never be questioned. Later, Darius's hotel suite became a temporary command center. Laptops covered tables. Phones rang constantly. Members of his team spoke in low, focused voices. Vivian Park, his communications director, stood near a window with a tablet. "An edited clip is spreading quickly," she said. "Millions of people have already seen it." She turned the screen toward him. The video showed only the final part of the cabin confrontation. Darius standing near Vanessa. His announcement about the contract. Everything before that had been removed. "They cut out her comments," Vivian said. "They cut out the seat dispute. They cut out the way she blocked the aisle." Calvin Rhodes, Darius's chief legal officer, sat at a table covered in documents. "All that's left is you standing over her while making what they're calling a financial threat." Darius loosened his tie and looked toward the city. "The board is getting nervous," Vivian admitted. The chairman has called repeatedly. He's worried about investor reaction. Several major partners also want emergency discussions. A television played business coverage silently in the background. Vanessa appeared on the screen with tissues in one hand. A caption described her as a passenger speaking out. Calvin muted it. Their strategy is working, he said. Grant's public relations people are framing you as an angry executive who lost control over a misunderstanding and weaponized a contract against a woman. A helpless woman, Vivian added bitterly. They're emphasizing that angle. The airline's social channels are being flooded with demands for action. Darius's phone vibrated with another worried message from a board member. He set it face down. Show me everything they're using. Vivian opened several windows on her tablet. Besides the edited clip, they have passenger statements from people seated near Vanessa, all describing you as intimidating. Local television stations are repeating it, and business media is beginning to follow. She displayed Grant's latest statement. It claimed Harcourt Consulting respected healthy competition, but rejected the use of economic leverage to threaten and coerce. It described Vanessa as the victim of a frightening incident. Calvin shook his head. Frightening incident. It's working, Vivian said. Public comments are overwhelmingly against us right now. The airline is discussing a permanent travel ban. We're losing control of the story. Darius walked toward the window. Then we changed the story by restoring the facts. He faced his team. How many passengers were recording? We could clearly see several, Vivian replied. There may have been more, and the airline has internal video, Calvin added. Multiple camera angles. We've already requested preservation and access through legal channels. Move faster, Darius said. I want every available second from boarding until the dispute ended. He considered the next step. Get the passenger list for first class and the nearby rows. Vivian began typing. Looking for witnesses. Looking for the truth, Darius corrected. Somebody who wasn't connected to Vanessa saw the entire thing. Find them. His phone rang again with another board call. He let it ring. Calvin lifted an email. There's more. Harcourt Consulting filed a civil lawsuit. They're alleging emotional distress, interference with business, and defamation. They're also requesting an emergency order preventing us from discussing the incident. Of course they are, Darius said. They want silence from us while they define the story for everyone else. Vivian looked at him carefully. Darius, I have to ask, are you certain you want to fight this all the way? We could issue a carefully worded apology. Call it a mutual misunderstanding. Restore the contract. The board would support that. The room became still. Outside, lights spread across the city. The easier path was obvious. Apologize. Back away. Allow Vanessa to claim the victory. Allow Grant to protect his family name. Allow the same old system to function as it always had. Darius remembered every time he had stayed quiet to preserve professionalism. Every insult he had ignored. Every coded remark he had pretended not to understand because the cost of responding seemed too high. Then he thought about younger professionals watching the story unfold and learning the same lesson he had been forced to learn. No, he said. He turned fully toward the room. No apology. Not this time. Vivian, prepare every legitimate media relationship we have, but don't release anything until we have complete evidence. Calvin, prepare responses to their lawsuit and draft the necessary regulatory complaints. This is larger than one argument on an airplane. A message arrived from the social team. Several passengers had agreed to provide full videos. Others were considering it. Darius nodded. Good. We do not release fragments. We don't answer edited context with different edited context. When we move with the complete record. The city continued humming below them. Vanessa was probably giving interviews. Grant was probably meeting attorneys. Their carefully shaped version of events was probably spreading farther with every minute. Darius was willing to let them believe it was working. He wanted the entire pattern documented before he responded. Another passenger confirmed access to unedited video. Calvin began preparing formal demands for the airline's security feeds. The pieces slowly came together. Across the city, people watched short clips and formed strong opinions from incomplete information. Darius knew something they did not. Truth sometimes moved slowly, but one unedited frame could change the meaning of an entire story. Later, Darius joined a video conference with his full legal and communications team. Faces filled the screen from offices across several time zones. Vivian's social media director, Tessa Grant, reported the first major update. One complete passenger video is already spreading quickly. 2 more followed shortly after. Public sentiment is beginning to shift. Analytics on another screen showed a dramatic reversal. "Play the full cabin footage again," Julian requested. "I want every interaction properly cataloged." The main screen displayed a clear recording from a passenger a few rows behind. The video began at exactly the right moment. Vanessa's voice filled the speakers. "Seats like this aren't for people like you. Go find the back where you belong." The footage continued without cuts. Every dismissive gesture, every discriminatory implication, every calculated accusation. The deliberate way she placed her legs into the aisle, the smile she wore while Darius was questioned by security. Several members of the team shook their heads as they watched. "The airline's internal cameras confirmed the same sequence," Calvin reported. "We now have several independent angles. There is no serious room for misinterpretation." Vivian joined with another update. National networks are asking for the full footage. Major business channels have also requested comment. Darius watched the reaction change in real time. Messages condemning Vanessa's behavior replaced many of the accusations that had targeted him. His board chairman finally sent a different kind of message. "I saw the complete video. The board supports you." Calvin displayed a fresh airline statement. After reviewing additional footage, the airline acknowledged that normal seat assignment procedures had not been followed and announced a broader investigation. Julian studied the wording, careful enough to limit legal exposure, but clear enough to step away from Vanessa's account. The originally dominant edited clip was now being analyzed and challenged frame by frame. Aviation communities examined the cabin procedures. Business commentators discussed power and influence. Civil rights advocates highlighted the discriminatory undertones. "Grant Harcourt's communications operation has gone quiet," Tessa said. "They haven't issued anything since the full recordings began circulating." Darius allowed some of the tension in his shoulders to loosen. The truth was finally visible, but Julian remained cautious. "This is encouraging, but the Harcourts still have enormous resources. Their lawsuit remains active, and they could ask a court to restrict distribution of the footage." "We're also seeing unusual activity in financial discussions," Vivian added. "They may try to pressure your share price or frighten investors." "Grant Harcourt does not accept defeat easily," Julian said. "We should expect another move." Darius looked at the flow of supportive comments. "What's our next step?" "Hold position, document everything, and stay prepared," Julian answered. The team continued coordinating legal responses, security measures, and media monitoring. Before ending the call, Vivian gave Darius another update. "Public support is strongly in your favor now. Even some of the early critics are reversing their positions." "Stay focused," Darius told everyone. "This isn't about popularity. It's about accountability." One by one, the video windows disappeared. For the first time since the flight, the hotel suite became quiet. Darius stood at the window. The day had begun with a seat dispute and turned into public humiliation, corporate retaliation, and a battle over who would be believed. He shut down monitors and closed laptops. His team urged him to rest while they continued watching the media. He checked the doors, reviewed his schedule, and allowed the darkness of the suite to settle around him. For a while, the crisis seemed to pause. Then his phone erupted with urgent notifications. Vivian's message appeared first. "New video released. Turn on the news immediately." Darius switched on the television. A breaking news banner announced supposedly exclusive footage showing aggressive behavior during the flight. His stomach tightened. The video showed him standing near Vanessa's seat, but the angle had been manipulated. His movement had been slowed to make him look menacing. Vanessa's provocation had been removed. His voice had been altered to sound harsher. The calm restraint he had maintained throughout the conflict had been edited into something threatening. Calvin sent another message. "Multiple networks are airing it without proper verification." The screen shifted to a panel discussion. Commentators who had defended Darius only a short while earlier now questioned whether he had hidden his aggression. Analysts discussed his body language. One crisis consultant called the situation an example of manipulating public sympathy. Darius studied the technical information attached to the video. "They chose the release window carefully," he said. "They waited until verification teams were thin and online reactions could move faster than fact-checking." Julian called. The airline released another statement. "It's bad." Darius opened it. The airline announced that new evidence had caused it to suspend his flying privileges, while a complete safety review took place. More notifications arrived. A major technology partner paused negotiations. An emergency board meeting was called. Market expectations weakened. Harcourt Consulting amended its lawsuit and cited the new recording as evidence. Darius paced the suite while the public victory he had just experienced began collapsing. Social media turned again. People accused him of fraud. Others claimed Vanessa had been right. Hours of verified context were being buried under a few minutes of calculated manipulation. Vivian's team pushed technical analysis showing that the new clip had been altered. Experts identified editing artifacts, but the correction spread more slowly than the accusation. Grant Harcourt's fingerprints are everywhere, Julian said during the emergency conference. The distribution, the timing, the immediate legal filing. This was coordinated. They let us think the story was over, Calvin added. Then they attacked when everyone relaxed. Darius stood at the window. Fatigue blurred the city lights. Another board member suggested that he consider stepping away temporarily. Television commentators discussed his character as though they had known him personally for years. Algorithms amplified the controversy because outrage drew attention. Vivian's voice came through the call. They're demanding your resignation in some circles. The backlash is exploding again. Darius watched headlights moving steadily through the fog below. Something became clear. He had been defending himself one accusation at a time, explaining, correcting, responding. The Harcourts were counting on that. Their strategy required him to remain trapped inside the frame they created. Get me everything, Darius told Julian. Everything. The complete file on Harcourt Consulting. Every discrimination complaint. Every buried settlement. Every documented case where money or pressure was used to silence someone. Every pattern of retaliation. The team became quiet. They understood what he was asking. And I want the airline's internal communications, Darius continued. Security footage, employee accounts, passenger records, everything connected to how they made their decisions. Julian hesitated. That's an aggressive move. Once we start down that path. They chose that path, Darius replied. They chose it when Vanessa decided a seat with my name on it somehow belonged to her. Everything afterward was deliberate. The false complaints, the edited footage, the coordinated pressure. They're not trying to prove their version is right. They're trying to erase mine. Another partner sent a worried message. Another headline questioned his integrity. But Darius no longer felt pushed backward by the notifications. They strengthened his resolve. This may become extremely ugly, Vivian warned. It has been ugly from the beginning, Darius said. I was simply still hoping they would stop before we reached this point. He faced the screen filled with his team. No more reacting to every accusation. No more assuming the truth can protect itself. We're finished playing their game. The city stretched beneath him. Somewhere, Grant and Vanessa probably believed they had regained control. They trusted the same money, influence, and social connections that had protected them before. Darius looked at his reflection in the dark glass. The old pattern depended on power-avoiding consequences. That pattern was about to be challenged. As the first pale light began appearing beyond the horizon, Darius reviewed the evidence package assembled by his team. 3 major groups of records lay before him. The first contained the complete audiovisual record, raw airline security footage from multiple angles, full passenger videos, recordings of Vanessa's communications with airline personnel, metadata and authentication reports showing where the manipulated viral clip had been cut, altered, slowed, and rearranged. Vivian confirmed the technical analysis. We can prove the editing in detail. Every major manipulation is documented. The second group contained the retaliation paper trail, internal messages from Harcourt Consulting, obtained through lawful discovery and cooperating employees, communications directing the public relations attack, strategy notes discussing how to damage Darius's reputation, messages sent to friendly media contacts. Calvin looked stunned by the carelessness. Grant assumed influence meant he would never need to hide what he was doing. The emails showed that the campaign was not a spontaneous reaction to the cabin dispute. It was an organized attempt to destroy Darius professionally, because Vanessa's humiliation had become a threat to the Harcourt name. The third set of evidence went much deeper. Years of complaints involving discriminatory treatment at Harcourt Consulting, confidential settlements, patterns excluding minority-owned contractors, hiring and promotion statistics suggesting consistent bias, records showing how money and influence had buried concerns that might otherwise have become public. Julian summarized it plainly. This is no longer about one airplane. The cabin incident fits a documented pattern they have spent years trying to keep hidden. Darius studied the planned distribution list. Major news organizations, financial regulators, aviation oversight authorities, shareholder groups, government committees, industry watchdogs. Every recipient would receive the same complete record rather than selected fragments. The goal was not to win through a better edited clip. It was to make selective storytelling impossible. Vivian explained that the release needed to happen when markets and morning news programs were active, but Darius no longer cared about a precise clock. He cared that every channel received the evidence together. His team had prepared for the possibility that Harcourt would escalate. Now the contingency was ready. "What are the legal risks?" Darius asked. "They will sue," Julian answered. "Probably from several directions, but the material is documented and authenticated. Discovery could expose even more than what we already have." "What about the airline? Their internal messages show pressure from Harcourt influenced their decisions," Vivian said. "They didn't act solely on verified evidence. Their legal exposure could be substantial." Darius stood and stretched his tired shoulders. "What about the people who had nothing to do with this?" His team understood immediately. "There will be collateral consequences," Julian admitted. "Harcourt Consulting may lose contracts. The stock could fall. Employees could face uncertainty." "Innocent employees," Darius said. "Yes." Julian paused. "But protecting the system also harms innocent people. Contractors who are excluded. Employees whose careers were blocked. People pressured into silence. The damage already exists. Hiding it only continues it." Darius touched the folders. They were not weapons in the abstract. They represented real livelihoods, careers, and lives. He did not enjoy the idea that ordinary employees might suffer because executives had abused their power. But he also understood that refusing accountability simply shifted the cost back onto the people. The Harcourts had already harmed. Another headline appeared repeating the aggressive passenger narrative. Another suggestion that Darius should quietly apologize. Vivian asked the final question. "Do we proceed?" Darius looked at his reflection in the window. The same face Vanessa had dismissed before she knew his name. The same expression he had held while security questioned him. The room behind him contained years of evidence, showing that what happened on the plane had not been an isolated attitude. Julian warned him. "They will call the response excessive, vindictive, disproportionate. People often call accountability excessive when it finally reaches those who believe they were protected from it," Darius replied. His team waited. Outside, the city was waking. Darius turned to his laptop and typed a simple instruction. "Release everything." The evidence began moving. The first wave was the unedited cabin footage. Complete audio restored Vanessa's original comments. "Seats like this aren't it for people like you." Viewers saw the way she blocked the aisle. They saw her smile while security questioned Darius instead of asking her to leave his seat. They saw Darius remain calm through every accusation. Online reaction changed rapidly. News organizations began replacing stories built around the manipulated recording. Updated headlines said new evidence contradicted claims that Darius had been the aggressor. Other reports focused on the internal communications, showing an organized attack. Then the second wave reached financial media. Harcourt Consulting's emails were released in full context. Analysts read Grant's instructions to bury Darius professionally and make the story stick. The messages showed the retaliation campaign had begun before the aircraft had even completed departure procedures. Financial markets reacted immediately. Harcourt Consulting's shares fell sharply. Trading was interrupted as investors tried to understand the scale of the risk. The airline's stock also weakened as questions arose about discriminatory treatment and improper outside influence. Then regulators began responding. Financial authorities confirmed receipt of the records. Aviation regulators began reviewing the airline's conduct. Other agencies announced preliminary examination of Harcourt Consulting. The story had moved far beyond one first-class seat. It now involved corporate governance, retaliation, discrimination, and possible regulatory violations. Darius's board chairman called. He let it go to voicemail. At that moment, there was nothing useful he could add. The evidence was speaking. Television networks compared Vanessa's tearful interview with the complete cabin recording. Claims she had made only hours earlier collapsed when shown beside unedited footage. Commentators questioned why the airline had suspended Darius before completing its review. Grant's internal messages were quoted directly. Public sentiment turned decisively. Vivian monitored the response. "Support has reversed almost completely," she said. "People are seeing the full context now." Darius remained quiet. Years of carefully protected influence were weakening under documented facts. Financial reporters began investigating Harcourt Consulting's history. Old complaints resurfaced. Industry analysts examined patterns involving minority-owned vendors. Hiring and promotion records drew attention. Major shareholders requested emergency meetings. Harcourt's legal team attempted to make contact through private channels. Darius drank cold coffee while remembering boardrooms where people had mistaken him for support staff. He thought of all the people who had never reached a position powerful enough to force anyone to reconsider those assumptions. The released records were telling their stories too. The airline announced that it was suspending business relationships with Harcourt Consulting pending review. Other corporate partners began distancing themselves. Grant's network of influence suddenly looked fragile. Vanessa attempted to arrange another public appearance. Julian recommended silence. Darius agreed. More passengers from the flight came forward. Additional video angles appeared. Flight attendants anonymously described internal pressure to accept Vanessa's version. Other stories involving the Harcourts surfaced. Old conflicts. Other moments when social status had been used to push people aside. Financial channels began using words like systemic and institutional. The story was no longer about whether one wealthy passenger had taken another person's seat. It was about what that behavior revealed. Darius stood at the window and watched the city become fully active. His phone continued vibrating. Supportive messages came from people who had criticized him earlier. Hostile messages came from people who still wanted him to disappear. He answered neither. Fresh headlines announced shareholder demands, regulatory investigations, and government requests for documents. Then federal agencies confirmed they were reviewing Harcourt Consulting's conduct. The same kind of investigation, powerful people often assumed would never reach them, had finally begun. Market trading opened with Harcourt Consulting's shares falling dramatically. Electronic safeguards repeatedly paused trading as sell orders overwhelmed buyers. Darius watched the financial coverage from the hotel. Television screens showed Harcourt Consulting's headquarters, where government vehicles had arrived. Investigators entered carrying document cases. A news anchor reported that authorities were executing search warrants at multiple company locations. Julian called. "They're moving faster than we expected." The released emails gave investigators enough direction to act. Servers and records are being secured in several places. Grant appeared on television trying to defend the company. "These allegations are false," he insisted. "This is an attack from a competitor designed to damage our reputation. Harcourt Consulting has always operated according to the highest ethical standards." The network immediately displayed Grant's own internal messages beside him. "Make sure Bennett understands his place. Use every available source of pressure. Make the problem disappear." His written words undermined his denial more effectively than any accusation from Darius could have. Trading resumed briefly, then fell again. Analysts who had praised Harcourt Consulting began questioning its culture and governance. Vivian interrupted with another update. "You need to see what's happening online." People had identified Vanessa from the flight footage. Her carefully cultivated public image was collapsing as former country club acquaintances, charity colleagues, and social contacts began sharing stories about earlier behavior. "I've never seen people come forward this quickly," Vivian said. "It's like everyone was waiting for the first person to speak." Messages arrived from corporate leaders who had distanced themselves from Darius the previous day. "We reacted too quickly. We'd appreciate a conversation." Others sent similar apologies. Their fear of Harcourt's influence had weakened once the company became the subject of federal scrutiny. The airline released another statement. Several executives were suspended while the company investigated discriminatory practices and outside influence. The airline formally apologized to Darius. His temporary travel ban quietly disappeared. His customer status was restored. It meant very little to him now. The larger questions mattered more. Evidence suggested Grant's influence had affected far more than one flight. Minority-owned businesses began describing similar experiences with Harcourt Consulting. Exclusion, retaliation, closed doors. Analysts described the canceled $500 million contract as the thread that had started pulling apart a much larger structure. Shareholders demanded meetings. Partners reviewed contracts. Public officials who had received support from Harcourt began distancing themselves. Vanessa's social media profiles went dark. Her charity positions disappeared from websites. Her private club announced a membership review. Government committees requested Harcourt records. Calvin explained that the timing of Grant's retaliation was drawing particular attention. The effort to destroy Darius's reputation had begun almost immediately after the seat confrontation. Television analysts debated whether Harcourt Consulting could survive. Its value had dropped to nearly half of what it had been before the crisis. One financial commentator summarized the crisis. This isn't really about one incident on one flight. It's about everything that incident exposed. Darius continued receiving messages from people who suddenly wanted to stand beside him. He left most unanswered. Their support mattered less than the chance for buried complaints to finally be heard. News helicopters remained above Harcourt headquarters. Investigators carried out boxes of records. Grant was no longer visible. Financial authorities confirmed that the contract termination and the retaliation that followed had become central to the investigation. Darius watched another market halt appear on the television. A single moment of refusing to move quietly away from an assigned seat had become something much larger. Later, Darius stood in the lobby of his hotel, confirming arrangements for his departure when a disturbance near the entrance caught his attention. Vanessa Harcourt rushed through the revolving doors. Her designer clothing was wrinkled. Her usually perfect hair had fallen out of place. Dark makeup marked the skin beneath her eyes. Her hands trembled around an expensive handbag. The confident woman who had ordered him out of first class was gone. "Mr. Bennett," her voice broke as she hurried toward him. "Please, I need to speak with you." Hotel security moved to intercept her. Darius raised one hand to indicate that he was willing to hear what she had to say. He did not move toward a private room. Vanessa lowered her voice. "Just a few minutes. Somewhere private, please." Several hotel guests had already recognized her and were discreetly holding up phones. Darius gestured toward a seating area visible from the lobby. "We can speak there." He had no intention of being alone with Vanessa behind a closed door where another accusation could be manufactured. She followed him. As she sat down, her purse slipped from her hands and spilled across the floor. Keys, cosmetics, and a cracked phone scattered near her shoes. "I never wanted any of this to happen," she said as she gathered the items. "You have to understand. This is destroying everything. Our reputation, Grant's company, our family." Darius sat across from her with his hands calmly folded. "Our club suspended our membership," Vanessa continued. "Friends won't answer me. The children's school contacted us about the attention. Even my own sister told me not to call until this is over." Her voice broke. "You have to stop the investigators. Be reasonable. We can reach an agreement." People near the lobby bar were pretending not to watch. A hotel employee quietly spoke into a phone, likely updating security. "Mrs. Harcourt," Darius finally said, "what is happening now isn't something I control." "But it's your company," Vanessa replied. "Your lawyers. You can stop it." "No," Darius spoke without anger. "I cannot, and I would not if I could." "We'll pay you," Vanessa said quickly. "Whatever you want. Name the amount. Grant will make it happen. Just stop all of this." Darius slowly shook his head. "You still don't understand. This stopped being about money when you decided to use your privilege against me. Every step after that was a choice. I showed you the boarding pass, and you mocked it. The crew confirmed my seat, and you called security. When I told you about the contract decision, you filed complaints claiming I threatened you. When the original videos contradicted those claims, your husband's people tried to destroy my reputation." Vanessa's face tightened. "I was protecting what belonged to me." "No," Darius said gently. "You were defending what you believed you were entitled to. There's a difference. The seat was never yours. The power you used against me was not something you earned through truth or fairness. The consequences you're facing now came from choices you and your husband made." "It's not fair," Vanessa cried. "We're losing everything." "You tried to make me lose everything." Darius's voice stayed calm. "The federal investigators, financial regulators, and government committees are not working for me. They're reacting to evidence of discrimination, retaliation, and corruption that existed long before this flight. Your husband's response to what happened exposed that evidence." A television above the lobby bar showed investigators leaving Harcourt headquarters with more records. The company's declining stock price moved across the screen. "Please," Vanessa whispered. "I'll apologize publicly. I'll do anything." "That's the problem," Darius replied. "Right now, you're sorry because the consequences reached you. That isn't the same as being sorry for what you did." Vanessa stared at him. Her social confidence had disappeared, leaving fear underneath it. "So that's it. You won't help us." "The truth is helping," Darius said as he stood. "It's helping the people who were treated the way you treated me, and never had the power to make anyone listen. Sometimes accountability arrives through consequences." Vanessa's shoulders shook. Nearby guests were now openly recording. The woman who had demanded Darius's removal from first class was sitting in a hotel lobby asking him to rescue her from the results of her own actions. Darius did not celebrate the reversal. Reporters began gathering outside after learning Vanessa was at the hotel. Camera flashes appeared beyond the windows. She stood and clutched her belongings. "I hope you're satisfied," she said bitterly. Darius adjusted his suit jacket. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Harcourt." Then he walked away. He did not turn back. There was nothing more he needed to say. Later, the airline's corporate headquarters became the setting for a major press conference. Journalists filled the room. Camera crews crowded around the available spaces. Airline Chief Executive Nolan Pierce stood at a podium with members of his executive team. The confidence usually associated with corporate announcements had been replaced by visible discomfort. Darius sat at the center of a long table in a charcoal suit. Nolan began. "We're here to address the deeply troubling treatment of Mr. Bennett during his recent flight. But more importantly, we're here to acknowledge that our company failed in its response." Cameras clicked rapidly. Nolan turned toward Darius. "On behalf of the entire airline, I offer our sincere apology. You experienced discriminatory treatment, false accusations, and public humiliation. That began with another passenger. But our own employees and procedures failed to correct it quickly and fairly." The room became quiet. Effective immediately, all restrictions on Mr. Bennett's travel privileges are removed. We are also beginning a full review of our incident response process, with specific attention to preventing discriminatory escalation. A reporter asked what would happen to crew members who had accepted Vanessa's version without properly investigating. Nolan answered, "The employees involved have been removed from active duty pending review. We are also introducing mandatory anti-bias training for all customer-facing teams." Another reporter looked toward Darius. "Mr. Bennett, do you think this is enough?" Darius leaned towards the microphone. "This isn't really about whether an apology is enough. It's about whether accountability leads to change. The airline is taking steps toward both." Another journalist asked about Grant and Vanessa Harcourt. "That matter belongs with the appropriate authorities now," Darius answered. Everyone in the room knew Harcourt Consulting had already lost nearly 40% of its market value. The airline's compliance officer described new procedures, clearer escalation rules, independent review for serious passenger disputes, stronger training, a passenger advocacy board with real authority. With each announcement, the story became less about personal conflict and more about institutional reform. Darius's legal team watched from the audience. The objective was not humiliation. It was correction. Nolan announced another commitment. The airline would significantly expand its diversity and inclusion programs, and Bennett Innovations would serve as an advisory partner in designing practical reforms. The announcement triggered more questions. The partnership involved a multi-million-dollar commitment to measurable changes rather than symbolic promises. A business reporter addressed Darius. "Your company's stock has risen sharply since the evidence was released. Do you feel vindicated?" Darius considered the question. This was never about stock prices or personal victory. It was about refusing to surrender dignity when power and prejudice tried to override truth. His words carried weight because he did not speak with triumph. Another reporter pressed him. "Surely you feel some satisfaction watching the Harcourts lose so much." "What I feel is hope that people understand what accountability is supposed to do," Darius said. "Accountability isn't revenge. It's correction. Change isn't humiliation. It's progress." The press conference ended with the airline promising immediate implementation of the new policies. Darius stood and shook hands with the executives. It was a simple gesture, but it symbolized how much had changed since the cabin confrontation. Afterward, his phone continued filling with updates. Financial regulators had opened a formal Harcourt investigation. Major banks suspended business with the firm. Government committees planned hearings. The network that had once protected the Harcourts was now examining them. A staff member approached Darius. "Your car is ready. We've also arranged priority check-in for your return flight." Darius thanked him and collected his belongings. Reporters called questions as he walked outside. Any comment on Grant Harcourt's resignation? Has Vanessa contacted you again? What do you expect from the federal investigation? Darius smiled politely and continued toward the waiting car. He had already said what mattered. The rest belonged to evidence, law, and time. When Darius later returned to the airport for his flight back to Chicago, the same terminal that had witnessed his humiliation carried a very different atmosphere. Passengers recognized him. Some nodded respectfully. Others smiled. The gate agent stood straighter when he approached. "Good evening, Mr. Bennett. We've confirmed your first-class seat. Complimentary, of course." "Thank you," Darius replied. He accepted the boarding pass and walked down the jet bridge. Flight attendants greeted him by name. The respect felt genuine rather than performative. Passengers watching his arrival no longer saw a man being accused of not belonging. They saw someone whose restraint had turned a humiliating experience into a demand for change. Darius reached seat 2A again. This time, it was empty and waiting for him. He sat quietly. He did not announce his status. He did not hide from attention either. A flight attendant offered him water. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Bennett. We're glad to have you with us." The cabin filled with the normal sounds of departure preparation. A young business traveler across the aisle kept glancing toward Darius, clearly recognizing him from the news. Darius remained himself. He had learned long ago that dignity did not require chasing validation. It required knowing who you were, even when other people refused to see it. The cabin lights shifted while the aircraft systems completed their checks. Darius's phone vibrated once before he switched it to airplane mode. A message from Julian confirmed that Harcourt Consulting's board had accepted Grant's resignation. Additional legal action remained possible. Darius closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, the cabin felt ordinary. No tense crowd, no argument, no supervisor holding 2 boarding passes, as though one of them might somehow stop being real. The crew prepared for departure. Then the captain made an unusual announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we leave, I'd like to acknowledge a passenger traveling with us. Mr. Darius Bennett is seated in first class. Many of you may recognize him from recent news. What matters most is that his professionalism during an incident involving discrimination has already contributed to significant changes in airline policy and industry discussion. His restraint and dignity have set an example that we hope will benefit passengers and crew members in the future." Applause spread through the cabin. It was not hesitant or ceremonial. It sounded genuine. Darius gave a quiet nod. A flight attendant smiled. "Can I bring you anything before takeoff, Mr. Bennett?" "Just water, please. Thank you." His voice carried the same measured tone he had used when Vanessa first refused to leave his seat. As the aircraft moved away from the gate, Darius thought about everything that had followed from that simple moment. Vanessa's certainty, her husband's retaliation, the airline's failure to investigate carefully, the brief victory of privilege over truth. He also thought about the cost of silence. Not only the personal cost, the larger one. Every time a person quietly steps aside because someone more powerful demands it, a broken system learns that intimidation works. The aircraft accelerated along the runway. Outside the window, the final colors of daylight faded into deeper blue. A last notification had appeared before Darius shut down his phone. Vanessa's public accounts had been deactivated amid the backlash. The plane rose from the runway. San Francisco spread beneath him like a field of lights and slowly became smaller. A news update appeared on the seatback screen, reporting continued federal review of Harcourt Consulting's financial and contracting practices. Darius watched the headline pass without emotion. Justice was continuing through ordinary processes now. No speech from him was necessary. The attendant returned with his water. "We're glad you're here," she said softly. What happened had to bring change. The system needed to learn from it. Darius thanked her. She was right. Change rarely begins in comfort. Sometimes it begins when a person refuses to step aside simply because someone expects them to. Sometimes it begins when a witness chooses to record the full truth instead of the convenient part. Sometimes it begins when an employee questions a powerful customer's accusation instead of assuming status equals credibility. And sometimes it begins when a person who has been humiliated chooses accountability without becoming cruel in return. The aircraft climbed above the clouds. Stars appeared clearly in the dark sky. The captain announced that the flight had reached cruising altitude and expected a smooth journey ahead. Darius adjusted his seat and finally felt the tension leaving his body. The true victory was never Vanessa's humiliation. It was not Grant's resignation. It was not the collapse in Harcourt Consulting's stock price. Those were consequences, not the purpose. The real victory was the certainty that standing firm had been the right choice. For too long, the systems around Vanessa and Grant had rewarded the assumption that influence could replace fairness. The cabin incident forced those systems to look at themselves. Some people lost positions. Some organizations faced investigations. Some businesses suffered financially. But change began because the truth was finally allowed to exist without being edited into something more convenient. Darius looked around the dim cabin. Other passengers had settled into quiet routines. Some worked, some read, others slept. The enormous drama that had dominated the news already felt distant from this peaceful space above the clouds. He looked out the window. Moonlight covered the cloud tops with silver. Each mile carried him farther from the confrontation and closer to resolution. His future remained secure, not because he had shouted louder than Vanessa, but because he had refused to let humiliation define him. And perhaps that was the deepest lesson of all. Dignity does not need permission. It does not come from a first-class ticket, a corporate title, a bank balance, or the approval of strangers. Dignity belongs to a person before anyone knows what they own or whom they know. Vanessa's first mistake was not simply sitting in the wrong seat. It was deciding, without evidence, that Darius could not possibly belong there. Her greater mistake came afterward. She was given several opportunities to correct herself. She could have looked at the boarding pass and moved. She could have listened when the crew confirmed the assignment. She could have apologized when the facts became clear. Instead, pride pushed her deeper into a position that truth could no longer support. Grant made the same choice on a larger scale. When his company lost an important contract, he could have examined what happened honestly. Instead, he used lawyers, public relations teams, and influence to punish the person his wife had already mistreated. Each attempt to avoid responsibility created a larger consequence. That is something worth remembering in ordinary life. A mistake does not always define us. What often defines us is what we do after the mistake becomes clear. We can defend our pride, blame someone else, and keep escalating. Or we can stop, admit what happened, apologize sincerely, and repair what we can. Accountability can feel uncomfortable, but discomfort is not the same as injustice. Sometimes discomfort is simply the feeling of finally facing the effects of our own choices. Darius also showed another kind of strength. He had the power to humiliate Vanessa in return, but he did not. When she came to the hotel desperate and frightened, he listened. He refused to erase the consequences, but he did not threaten her, mock her appearance, or celebrate her pain. That difference matters. Justice and revenge can look similar from a distance because both may involve consequences. The difference is purpose. Revenge wants another person to suffer. Justice wants the harm to stop, the truth to be recognized, and future harm to become less likely. The airline's apology mattered because it was followed by changes, new procedures, better training, independent review, a willingness to admit that the company had failed. Words alone would not have been enough. The same is true in our personal lives. An apology becomes meaningful when our behavior changes after we say it. The passengers who recorded the encounter played an important role too. Without complete footage, edited clips nearly replaced reality. That is a reminder to be careful with the stories we believe and share. A few seconds of video can be real and still be misleading when the surrounding context is missing. A headline can contain facts and still lead us toward the wrong conclusion. When people's reputations and lives are involved, patience matters, verification matters, listening matters. Darius's team eventually succeeded because they refused to answer manipulation with more manipulation. They waited for full recordings. They authenticated the evidence. They released context instead of fragments. That patience protected the truth. There is also a quieter lesson in the people who initially looked away. The passengers who buried themselves in laptops. The crew members who hesitated even after the seat assignment was confirmed. The people who knew something felt wrong but hoped someone else would handle it. Most injustice does not continue because everyone agrees with it. Sometimes it continues because too many people are uncomfortable speaking up. Courage does not always require a dramatic confrontation. It may simply mean saying, "That seat belongs to him." It may mean telling a supervisor, "The documents are valid." It may mean refusing to repeat an accusation you know is false. It may mean giving a truthful statement, even when the powerful person in the room wants silence. And forgiveness if it ever comes, does not require pretending the harm never happened. Darius did not owe Vanessa immediate forgiveness. He did not owe Grant protection from lawful investigation. Forgiveness is not the removal of responsibility. It is a personal choice about what we continue carrying inside ourselves after accountability has done its work. By the time Darius sat in seat 2A again, he was no longer trying to defeat anyone. He simply wanted to travel home. That may be why the ending matters. After all the headlines, contracts, legal threats, investigations, and corporate consequences, peace returned in a simple form. A quiet seat, a glass of water, the soft hum of the engines, a man looking out at the clouds and knowing that he had not surrendered his self-respect. In life, we will not always control what other people assume about us. We cannot control every rumor. We cannot force everyone to be fair, but we can choose how we respond. We can protect our dignity without becoming cruel. We can insist on truth without abandoning compassion. We can accept responsibility when we're wrong. We can give other people the basic respect we hope to receive ourselves. And when power is placed in our hands, we can remember that its most honorable use is not proving that we can make others smaller. It is making the space around us fairer. Darius found his peace not in watching someone else fall, but in knowing that dignity maintained through a crisis had proven stronger than privilege used without principle. There is one more reason this story stays with us after the headlines fade. At the beginning, Vanessa believed she could tell who belonged in first class simply by looking at the person standing in the aisle. She did not ask herself whether her assumption might be wrong. She did not begin with curiosity. She began with certainty. That kind of certainty can be dangerous in any part of life. We all make quick judgments. Sometimes they happen before we even realize it. We notice someone's clothes, accent, age, job, neighborhood, or appearance, and our minds try to complete a story with information we do not actually have. The important question is not whether we ever form a first impression. The important question is whether we remain willing to change it when reality gives us better information. Vanessa received better information again and again. Darius had a boarding pass. The manifest confirmed his seat. The crew verified his identity. Security examined his documents. Every new fact gave her another opportunity to stop. She could have moved aside and admitted the mistake. That simple choice would have prevented nearly everything that followed. Instead, she treated each fact as a threat to her pride. When the evidence challenged her assumption, she challenged the evidence. When the staff confirmed Darius was right, she challenged the staff. When her husband's corporate power could no longer protect her, she tried to turn herself into the victim. When the complete video revealed what happened, the Harcourts tried to replace it with a manipulated version. That pattern is worth thinking about. Sometimes the biggest consequences do not come from the first wrong decision. They come from all the smaller decisions made afterward to avoid admitting the first one. A sincere apology early can prevent a conflict from becoming a crisis. A willingness to say, "I was wrong," can protect relationships, careers, families, and communities from damage that pride keeps making larger. There is strength in being able to change our minds. There is dignity in correcting ourselves. There is maturity in listening when another person shows us that our assumption was unfair. And there is freedom in realizing that admitting a mistake does not make us smaller. It makes us more trustworthy. Darius's story also reminds us that self-control should never be confused with passivity. He was calm, but he was not weak. He did not shout, but he did not disappear. He did not insult Vanessa, but he did not surrender his seat simply to make the cabin more comfortable. He cooperated with security, but he continued asking for fair treatment. He answered the airline's questions, but he did not accept a false version of what happened. He listened to advisors who suggested an easy apology, but he chose not to confess to conduct he had not committed. Calmness gave him room to think. It gave the witnesses a clear picture of what happened. It gave the cameras a record that could not honestly be described as threatening behavior. It gave his legal and communications teams something solid to defend. Most importantly, it allowed him to remain himself while other people were trying to define him. That kind of self-control takes practice. When we feel humiliated, the natural impulse is often to respond immediately. We want to prove something. We want to make the other person feel what we are feeling. We want to answer disrespect with stronger disrespect. But the moment we give another person's behavior control over our own character, we may lose something more valuable than the argument. Darius chose another path. He let evidence carry the weight that anger might otherwise have carried. That does not mean everyone should remain silent in the face of unfair treatment. It means that the response should serve the goal. Sometimes speaking loudly is necessary. Sometimes asking for help is necessary. Sometimes leaving an unsafe situation is the wisest choice. Sometimes documenting what happened is essential. The point is not to imitate Darius's exact behavior in every circumstance. The point is to avoid letting someone else's cruelty choose our values for us. Another important lesson lies in the way public opinion moved throughout the story. People judged Darius several different times without having the complete record. First, some passengers quietly assumed Vanessa must have a reason for objecting to him. Then social media users saw incomplete clips and formed conclusions. Later, full footage changed those conclusions. Then another manipulated video caused many people to reverse themselves again. Finally, authenticated evidence restored the complete context. That cycle is familiar in a world where information travels faster than understanding. We are often encouraged to react immediately, to choose a side immediately, to share immediately, to condemn immediately. But speed can make us easy to manipulate. A video can be genuine and still be misleading if important seconds have been removed. A quotation can be accurate and still be dishonest if the surrounding words change its meaning. A headline can contain facts and still create a false impression. Patience is not indifference. Waiting for more information does not mean we do not care. Sometimes it is the most responsible thing we can do. Before sharing something that could damage a person's reputation, we can ask whether the source is complete. Before repeating an accusation, we can ask what evidence supports it. Before assuming a quiet person is guilty, because another person is louder, we can remember that confidence and truth are not the same thing. Vanessa spoke with enormous certainty. Darius spoke very little. For a while, her certainty influenced the people around them more than his evidence did. That is another reason fairness requires discipline. We have to learn to separate volume from credibility. The loudest person in the room is not automatically the most truthful. The most connected person is not automatically the most deserving. The most frightened-sounding person is not automatically the person who was harmed. And the person being questioned is not automatically the person who did something wrong. Good systems are designed to slow those assumptions down. They verify. They document. They hear more than one account. They preserve evidence. They create procedures that are supposed to protect people from the biases of one individual. The airline failed at first because its employees allowed status and pressure to interfere with those procedures. The later reforms mattered because they tried to make fairness less dependent on whether one employee happened to be brave enough in one difficult moment. That is what meaningful institutional change should do. It should not depend entirely on perfect people. It should create structures that help ordinary people make fairer decisions. The crew members were under pressure. They knew Vanessa's husband represented valuable business. They could see her expensive clothes and confidence. They understood that challenging her might create a complaint. Those pressures were real, but they were not a justification for treating Darius unfairly. This is something many people face at work. A powerful customer behaves badly. A senior manager makes an unfair demand. A profitable client expects special treatment. An employee sees something wrong but worries that speaking up could damage a career. There is no simple answer for every situation. People have families, bills, responsibilities, and fears. That is why organizations need protections for employees who raise legitimate concerns. A healthy workplace should not require someone to choose between honesty and survival. Darius' response to the airline after it admitted failure also matters. He did not reject every attempt at repair simply because the company had failed him. He listened. He watched whether the apology was accompanied by action. When the airline changed procedures, suspended employees pending review, created stronger oversight, and committed resources to reform, he recognized the difference between empty reputation management and meaningful correction. That does not erase what happened. Repair is not erasure. A change policy cannot remove the humiliation from the cabin. An apology cannot make the security questioning disappear from memory. But accountability can give harm a purpose it did not have before. It can turn one person's painful experience into a reason the next person may be treated better. That possibility does not make the original harm acceptable. It simply means something constructive can grow from it. The same idea applies to personal relationships. When we hurt someone, we may desperately want them to forgive us so that we can stop feeling guilty. But forgiveness exists for the person who was hurt, not for the comfort of the person who caused the harm. Vanessa wanted Darius to make the consequences disappear. She offered money. She offered a public apology. She asked him to stop investigators. But the timing revealed what she still had not fully understood. She wanted relief before she had shown responsibility. A genuine apology begins differently. It says what happened without minimizing it. It acknowledges the harm without shifting blame. It does not demand immediate forgiveness. It accepts that trust may take time to rebuild. It changes behavior, even if no reward follows. Vanessa may eventually become a different person. The story does not tell us what happens inside her after the cameras disappear. That part remains her responsibility. People can change, but meaningful change usually begins when excuses stop. Grant faced the same opportunity. His company's problems were not created by the evidence being released. The evidence revealed problems that already existed. Blaming Darius for the investigation would be like blaming a light for revealing something that had been hidden in darkness. That distinction matters. Accountability can feel like an attack to someone who has never been challenged. But being examined is not the same as being persecuted. Being asked to answer for documented conduct is not the same as being unfairly targeted. Consequences can be painful and still be legitimate. At the same time, Darius's concern for innocent employees showed that accountability should never become careless. When his team warned that contracts could disappear and jobs could be affected, he paused. He understood that large institutions contain people who had no role in executive misconduct. That concern prevented the conflict from becoming simple revenge. It reminded everyone that decisions at the top can affect people far below. Leaders carry that responsibility. When executives act dishonestly, employees may pay a price. When managers create discriminatory cultures, talented people may lose opportunities. When companies hide misconduct to protect a brand, the eventual collapse can harm customers, workers, and investors who never knew what was happening. Ethical leadership is not only about avoiding personal punishment. It is about remembering how many other lives are connected to the decisions we make. The $500 million contract in this story was enormous, but the basic principle applies even when the stakes are small. A supervisor deciding whom to promote, a teacher deciding whom to believe, a parent deciding how to respond to a child's mistake, a customer deciding how to treat an employee, a stranger deciding whether another stranger belongs. Power appears in ordinary moments. The question is what we do with it. Do we use it to make ourselves feel larger, or do we use it carefully, aware that the person in front of us deserves dignity too? Darius had power as well. Once the truth became public, people who had ignored him suddenly wanted his approval. Partners apologized. The airline offered special treatment. Reporters followed him. Vanessa came to him desperate for help. He could have used that moment to humiliate everyone who had doubted him. Instead, he kept returning to the same principle. The point was change. That restraint may be more impressive than the business victory itself. It is easy to talk about fairness when we are the person being treated unfairly. The harder test comes when the balance reverses and we become the person with the advantage. Do we suddenly justify the same cruelty when it benefits us? Or do we remain committed to the principle we demanded from others? Darius chose consistency. He wanted Vanessa and Grant held responsible. He did not want them treated without evidence. He wanted the airline to admit failure. He did not demand that every employee be publicly destroyed. He wanted Harcourt Consulting investigated. He still worried about innocent workers. That is the difference between principle and ego. Principle remains the same when power changes hands. There is also something meaningful in his final return to Seat 2A. The seat itself was never the true prize. It was simply a place he had paid for and been assigned. But because Vanessa tried to use humiliation to push him away from it, the seat became symbolic. Sitting there again did not prove that Darius was more important than anyone else. It proved that he did not need to surrender ordinary rights to preserve someone else's prejudice. Many people know the feeling of making themselves smaller so other people can remain comfortable. They stay quiet in meetings. They accept unfair jokes. They allow someone else to take credit. They avoid places where they fear being judged. They apologize for occupying space. Sometimes those choices are made for safety, and no one should be judged for protecting themselves. But whenever we have a safe opportunity to stand in our rightful place, doing so can matter. Not only for ourselves, it can make the path easier for someone who comes after us. The captain's recognition of Darius was meaningful because it did not celebrate wealth. It celebrated professionalism and dignity. Still, Darius did not need the applause to know that his response had been right. That is another kind of freedom. External validation can feel wonderful. Praise can encourage us. Recognition can repair some of the damage caused by public humiliation. But if our sense of worth depends entirely on applause, we remain vulnerable to the same crowd when its opinion changes. Darius saw public opinion turn against him, return to him, turn against him again, and finally support him. If he had allowed every shift to define his identity, he would have been emotionally pulled apart. Instead, he kept returning to evidence, values, and the people he trusted. There is wisdom in choosing carefully whose voices are allowed to define us. Not every stranger online deserves that power. Not every critic understands our life. Not every compliment is permanent. A steady sense of self can protect us from both unfair condemnation and excessive praise. Finally, this story invites us to think about kindness. Kindness is easy when nothing is at stake. The real test comes when kindness costs something. When moving out of the wrong seat requires admitting embarrassment. When speaking up for a stranger might attract attention. When telling a powerful customer no might create a complaint. When correcting a misleading story might make us unpopular. When apologizing means giving up the comforting idea that we were completely right. Kindness is not weakness. It often requires courage, because it asks us to see another person as fully human, even when our pride, fear, or convenience tells us not to. Responsibility works the same way. It is easy to celebrate responsibility as an idea. It is harder to accept it when the consequences belong to us. But responsibility is one of the ways trust is built. Families depend on it. Friendships depend on it. Companies depend on it. Communities depend on it. And systems of justice depend on people being willing to say, "This happened, this was wrong, and this is what we will do differently." If there is one thought worth carrying away from Darius's experience, perhaps it is this. Before we decide where another person belongs, we should remember how little of their story we can see. Before we use our power to push someone aside, we should ask whether fairness would still support our choice if our status disappeared. Before we defend a mistake, we should ask whether an honest apology could prevent a deeper wound. And when we are the person being treated unfairly, we can try to protect our dignity without surrendering our humanity. We will not always get a dramatic public correction. There may be no viral video, no corporate investigation, no applause on an airplane. Many acts of fairness happen quietly and are never recognized. They still matter. A person who chooses not to repeat a cruel rumor may never know what damage they prevented. A manager who gives someone a fair chance may never know how far that opportunity travels. A stranger who speaks up respectfully may change the way another person remembers a difficult day. A sincere apology may repair a relationship before anyone else knows it was in danger. Living kindly is often made of small decisions like these. They rarely become headlines, but they shape the world people have to live in. And in the end, that may be the most important form of influence any of us can have. If this story meant something to you, leave a like to support the channel and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. 2 more stories have been selected for you on the screen. Take care of yourself, treat people with respect, and have a wonderful day.